Hi, my name is Christy Narcy, and I am the Phoenix, Arizona chapter leader of Independent Women's Network. And we are a network of about 30,000 independent-minded women with chapters across the country. And we want to inspire, interact, influence, and impact our local communities. Our goal is to restore civility and common sense when discussing the issues that are affecting our everyday lives. And so our platform, IWNetwork.com, it gives forward-thinking, patriotic women access to articles, networking opportunities, resources, so that they can really fight for the cause they're passionate about and not be afraid to stand up and realize there's a lot of us. Our Phoenix chapter is very excited to present this conversation today about public safety with For the Blue, an organization that you're going to hear about in a few minutes. And I'm going to take a little liberty of time here to introduce my esteemed guests because I think you will find very interesting their backgrounds. So first, Chief Michael Koval, retired chief of the Madison, Wisconsin Police Department. He began there in 1983. Is that right?
Yeah.
I was 5 years old. But that is not relevant at all to this conversation.
Very sobering, however, for me. Okay.
Our chief is a graduate of UW-Madison with a journalism degree. I find that super interesting. He attained his law degree from William Mitchell College of Law. He was a special agent for the FBI, served in Madison in patrol services. He's got 17 years as a sergeant of recruitment and training. In 2014, became the Madison Police Chief until 2019. And one thing I noticed, Chief, is that you are in the news a lot. As I was Googling you, right? And I recently read that you were on a trip with your 3-year-old grandson to a water park when you realized the next phase of your life, what you might do. And so you underwent lifeguard certification classes again.
Right. Boy, you really keep up with the deep research here.
Yep. I need to know. I need to be in the know. And they quoted you saying that all the other applicants were teens and all they wanted to do was rescue the old guy. And I found that to be so fun.
Yes, and some of them almost drowned me in the process. So I'm glad to be alive to talk to you today.
Yeah. I love that. Well, the mom in me absolutely loves that story because I remember what teenagers did at public pools. Okay. Wouldn't you love to be a teenager doing stupid things at the public pool only to find out that the lifeguard is a former chief of police?
Yes.
I feel like every mom just went, yes, please.
And interestingly enough, since you're in Phoenix, there's an acute shortage of lifeguards nationwide. And I got a headhunter from Phoenix that said, come to Phoenix for the summer. We'll pay you $2,500, give you a place to live and $25 an hour. And I said, but doesn't it get like to be 150 degrees in the shade? I said, I think I'll just stick here.
Oh my goodness. You know, the Phoenix heat, because what people always say to us is, well, isn't it a dry heat?
I hear that a lot.
And I'm just like, yeah, but so is a forest fire. I mean, it's still really hot. Just my opinion. Okay, our third guest, Miss Paula Fitzsimmons, founder for the Blue. And I'm so excited for you, Paula, to be here because I'm excited for you to inspire our chapters because you're not a police officer. You're not the expert in law enforcement per se, right? Although you know a lot, but you didn't work in it. But what is so fantastic is that you are a citizen who ran a grassroots group supporting local cops, at a time where they were under attack. They're still under attack. You lobbied successfully for additional funds for the Madison Police Department, passed a state law to benefit the Wisconsin Law Enforcement Memorial Fund, held 4 separate annual appreciation parties to celebrate Madison police officers, and you have given hosts of interviews, local news, radio personalities have interviewed you, and this is because of your grassroots advocacy And I just love that, because that's what our chapters are doing. That's what we're inspiring them to do, training them to do. And it's so important. It's so necessary. You even did a yard sign project. I love that. I hope you'll talk about that for a second, where you got everyone to put signs in their yards. I just love it. I love it. And so that you all know, she writes for her Substack, For the Blue. The name is For the Blue. And that's where she educates citizens on the important role of police, and really pushing back that narrative of the false narrative of police officers. So with that long introduction,
well done, Christy.
Beautiful. I just want you to know the caliber of the people you find here. I'm going to turn this over to Paula, and she is going to give you quite a bit of education in what she's passionate about. So take it over, my friend.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christy. That was a beautiful introduction. Very gracious. Thank you so much. And with that, let's get started. Thanks, everybody, for joining us on this presentation about how the war on police harms women and how women can take the lead in supporting police officers and restoring public safety. A little about me, as Christy said, I'm the founder of For the Blue. It's a citizen advocacy initiative for rank and file police officers. In 2015, I began supporting police officers here in Madison. And in 2022, I took my advocacy to the national level. I'm also an IWN member, proud IWN member here in Wisconsin. So let's get started. Okay, there are societal breakdowns like a declining nuclear family and an increase in mental illness and addiction that are certainly contributing to the current crime crisis we're having. Aside from that, there are two. One is the prioritization of criminal perpetrators via bail reform initiatives and activist district attorneys. So you've probably seen stories of DAs who refuse to charge violent offenders, and then they go on to commit heinous crimes. The other factor, and that'll be the focus of this presentation, is the ongoing war on police. So the noticeable demoralization of law enforcement began around 2015, shortly after the Ferguson, Missouri incident, and it accelerated in 2020 with the George Floyd riots. The result has been a nationwide policing staffing crisis. In 2019, the International Association of Chiefs of Police reported that at least 78% of police departments were having trouble recruiting qualified candidates. And this was prior to 2020 and the riots. The situation has since escalated. So police experts have been sounding the alarms about the staffing shortages. Patrick Yose, who is the president of the Fraternal Order of Police, recently stated that we see law enforcement officers leaving our profession at a rate we've never seen before. We have a crisis right now in manpower. And that was recently that he said that. So though police departments of every size are having issues recruiting and retaining qualified candidates, most of the cities affected tend to be those with an anti-police sentiment. Here are a few examples. The Seattle PD lost 400 officers between 2020 and 22. The NYPD lost over 3,700 officers in 2022, which represents the largest exodus in the past 20 years. And the Chicago PD lost over 1,400 officers, or about 11% of the force since March. And in the graph to the right, in Madison, Wisconsin, where I live, the department received just 288 applicants last year. For comparison, in 2012, they received 1,500. And in 2017, that number dipped to 574. So we went from 1,500 in 2012 to 288.
That is a terrifying number.
That is a terrifying number indeed. And it's being played out in police forces across the country, unfortunately. So a key number of factors have contributed to the current policing staffing crisis. It's just not one thing. It's a lot of different things combined. And the most harmful of these include the zealous indictments of police officers, which I'll get to in a minute, little visible support from the public, battling false cops are racist narratives, soft on crime policies where cops have to keep rearresting the same people, getting entangled in political crossfire, an increase in violence targeting cops, and officer burnout. And low morale also originates interdepartmentally, most notably from police chief who prioritize politics. So let's take a closer look at some of these factors. Cops are caught in political crossfire that is manifesting in a number of ways. For one, elected officials with little to no understanding of what police work entails are guiding police policy. For example, city councils who recommend tear gas bans and mayors who order police to stand down during riots. And the result has been catastrophic. Or they use terms like murder to describe officer-involved incidents where evidence shows clearly that the use of force was justified. These same politicians fail to speak out when officers are unfairly under fire. And the same DAs who refuse to prosecute felonies are zealously indicting police officers who act in accordance with the law and their training. In fact, indictments of police officers acting in accordance with the law and their training have proliferated. In Austin, Texas, for example, the DA indicted 19 officers for deploying beanbags that injured demonstrators during the 2020 riots. If convicted, some of these officers face life imprisonment. Meanwhile, the same DA rejected felony cases of civilians at a rate 735% higher from the same period in 2020. And two more examples. The New York Post reported that the Manhattan DA downgraded more than half of all felony cases to misdemeanors and lost half of the felony cases that did reach court. Meanwhile, the same office has an entire unit dedicated to prosecuting police officers. And in Madison, where I live, activists recently used an obscure law to persuade a judge to hold a hearing to reconsider charges against an officer involved in a fatal incident 7 years ago. And this is an incident that
Can I ask you one thing?
Sure.
Did you reference beanbags?
Beanbags. And they face life imprisonment for deploying beanbags at a riot where people are throwing things at you and they're in your face and they're throwing projectiles. No, Chief, do you know?
Well, they're deployed by like a shoulder weapon, if you will, almost looking like or resembling the effects of what a bazooka might look like. But what I'm suggesting is that by definition, they're considered less lethal in the way that they're deployed. They're intending to sort of be disruptive and to disperse rather than intended to kill anyone or anything like that. So they're higher on the pendulum of less lethal force options. But again, if they're correctly deployed, they should not result in death or great bodily harm.
That's good. Yeah.
It's just insane to me that a police officer trying to protect the public could actually face life imprisonment for doing his job and protecting the public in accordance with the law and his training. I mean, that's.
Yeah.
Well, what you're discussing here a little bit, Paula, to segue a little bit from the slides you've shown, is that historically we had the Ferguson effect in 2015. I believe one of your colleagues that you've been in contact with, Paula, Heather McDonald, has done an awful lot of academic research on that, in where officers are so fearful of both being publicly put on an island, left isolated and alone, civil judgments made into pariahs, if you will, and made the scorn of public ridicule whatever, you have this phenomenon where officers are doing only the bare minimum in some cases. And of course, that's been exacerbated since the Minneapolis case. And so now, not only are officers afraid to take the action, which in a microsecond of judgment might be deemed wrong by the Monday morning quarterbacks, but now there's almost a failure to take any action because of the fear of how that will be reviewed in hindsight.
And that actually puts all of us at risk. And it puts the people in the marginalized communities at risk. I mean, they're the ones that I think are suffering the most.
I agree.
So also contributing to low retention rates is fatigue and burnout. Policing is already a difficult job, but being severely understaffed means that cops are subjected to mandatory overtime. They have little time to spend with their families or to decompress. In addition, the number of high priority calls they're responding to have increased. These conditions lead not only to burnout, they increase the chance of officer error.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the policing crisis affects all of us. I mean, it male or female, but it does particularly affect women in a number of ways. So for one, there are longer wait times for service, and in some cases, no service, including for high priority calls like domestics and rapes. And I'll get to that in a minute. I'll give you an example. There's little time to dedicate to proactive policing or to community policing and outreach activities that build trust and humanize the badge. Smaller recruitment pools have forced departments to lower their standards, and that's resulted in a lower caliber of candidates. Special units, including those that focus on human trafficking and sensitive crimes where women are primarily victims, are being downgraded or altogether abandoned. Moreover, and the chief can speak to this, women who may have been interested in a policing career are hesitant. This is a loss not only to women, but to the communities they serve.
Yeah, I just historically say that if you look at all of the agencies that have policing powers, whether they be federal, state, county, municipal, prisons, universities, all of which have law enforcement powers of arrest to detain and to use force, you will see that historically women across the board, when I left the profession actively 4 years ago, accounted for less than 15% demographically of our workforce. Now, when you look at what's happened as a postscript to everything that's going on in our world, those numbers, like so many people of color and women, are clearly disinclined to say that this is a kind of career avocation or calling that I'm drawn to when you're constantly sort of on the hot seat, if you will, in terms of public scrutiny. So I'm really hoping that somehow, like so many things in our society are cyclical, I pray that this is the case.
I hope so too.
And moms aren't encouraging their kids to be officers.
Excellent point, Christy.
Military as well,
military is another one.
Right. They esteemed, so highly, and it was so honorable to go do, and it still is, but it is just so dangerous and risky. So, yeah.
But I do think that with, like you said, Christy, with our armed forces as well as policing, there's been a sense of the nobility of that call having been tarnished. And that's really unfortunate based on literally some outlying cases. So,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Moving on. So I thought we'd look at some specific police departments that have had to settle and who are having some issues. Due to a critical staffing shortage at the Seattle PD, the department has had to halt the investigation of new adult sexual assaults. Their focus is on cases involving children, as well as adult cases with a suspect already in custody. So in other words, they're not investing they don't have the manpower to investigate new sexual assaults.
So what you're saying,
women.
right? So what you're saying now, I told you gals earlier, or gals. Sorry, Chief.
That's all right.
God. I've got 2 adult daughters. They're 22 and 23 years old, and they were born in the Seattle area. So if they went back to their hometown, what you're saying to us is that if they were sexually assaulted and not kidnapped, then their case would not be investigated. Is that?
That is my understanding. Just because there are just not enough cops to investigate right now. I don't know if it's changed. I mean, this report came out like a year ago. I don't know if the situation has changed. But as it stands right now, that is my understanding of what's happening. And it's a real crying shame.
My sense, Paula, is that a lot of these agencies goes to the third point about adult cases with suspects already in custody. Every case that comes in for intake internally with the police department, you have sort of a checklist of solvability factors. So if there's DNA, if there's eyewitnesses, if the victim can identify, because it's an acquaintance assault, who the case may be, if it has a high or readily adaptable, quicker turnaround time that will result in a physical custody, I think those cases may still go forward. But they're literally looking for things to filter because they have such an excess of workloads placed upon them that they will look for reasons not to advance a case. And so if those solvability factors are at all tenuous, then we're on to the next thing, because they can barely keep up with their current rate.
Wow. That is frightening as heck to me. As women, I mean, I'm nervous going to any big city, right? I'm originally from Chicago, and I'm used to driving the L and walking the streets and so forth. I won't do it now. I'm frightened.
Yep.
So another one, and this one is going to shock you as well. In Chicago, records show that in 2021, there were no police officers wait for this one, available to respond to 52% of the 788,000 high priority calls dispatched. These included calls that are an imminent threat, including domestics and sexual assaults. And that's in Chicago. And then the LAPD, after losing more than 650 officers post-pandemic, they've had to reduce or disband several of their special units. Staffing for their animal cruelty unit, human trafficking unit, where women are predominant victims, and homeless outreach teams were reduced by 80%.
Wow.
Yeah. And a lack of police staffing has caused a whopping 60% of rapes to be unsolved by the NYPD in 2020. This represents the highest rate of unclosed rape cases since the department began releasing the data in 2018.
Wow.
So
I think that just for a moment there, Paula, I know that we want to stay in our lane and sort of focus on why we're here today, but you take a staffing shortage coupled with, in some instances, statewide bail reforms and district attorneys or state's attorneys who have basically decided we're not handling anything that would historically be a felony, unless it's a felony, or they're not touching property crimes. With all of those things combined, you've literally created this disastrous perfect storm.
Yes. That's exactly what I was thinking in my head, was we're in trouble.
Yes.
We are in trouble.
Yeah, because it's the perfect storm.
And it doesn't, here's the thing. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any any stopping this. I mean, it doesn't seem to be like we're on a road to recovery or anything. I mean, the recruitment numbers are still dropping. We still have DAs who are not prosecuting, violent offenders and such. So I think we're kind of stuck with this for the time being. That's why I think we really need to raise our voices and be heard.
Yeah.
Because this is not sustainable. I mean, none of this is sustainable. It's not working for any of us.
Yeah.
Well, not to mention the fact that everyone's quality of living is affected by this. And if stores are shuttering their doors,
right,
and the police cannot respond to calls of urgency and imminency, how much farther can we sink in terms of this problem we've created?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and another point, Chief, and you understand this, is even if we were to magically hire more cops right now, I mean, there's like a period where they have to be trained. And
absolutely.
That's like, what, 1.5 years to 2 years to get them on the streets. So we're talking, and first we have to motivate them to want to become police officers, and we have to attract the right candidates, and then we have to train them. And that's not something that you can just snap your fingers, and change like overnight. It's going to take at least what are you thinking, Chief? 1.5 years, 2 years, or?
Well, it would take at least 1.5 years for a rookie cop to sort of feel his or her stride and understand the network and how the process works and to be able to train. But what we're also seeing then is that you have rookies training rookies, because all of your veterans have left in such alarming numbers that you have to rely on, sort of the youngsters teaching other youngsters. But as any of you that have private sector jobs can attest, the fact that you have an opening and you might have 100 applicants, if someone's gone through that, wouldn't you say half to almost 2/3 really are not qualified, don't have the life experience, or would not be a compatible fit? So the same thing happens. We have meager numbers applying for these police jobs. And believe me, some of the applicants I've seen with the Action Jackson profiles with lack of empathy and lack of relational skills, I would never want to put them in a police uniform representing my community or the public. So we're scraping from what we have in those meager pools.
Oh my. And then it just further perpetuates the bad image that police have.
Correct. So, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. So like I said, both men and women are now at greater risk of becoming crime statistics. Women, however, are more vulnerable to crimes like domestic abuse, human trafficking, stalking, and rape. So without a solid blue line comprised of well-trained officers and fully funded units, we risk becoming victimized in greater numbers. And like I said before, most women's groups have been silent on this. And, it's an issue that profoundly affects us. And it's just really frustrating not to hear outcry. I mean, women are being victimized in greater numbers, and there's like no outcry from groups that are purportedly supporting women. As women, we can use our collective voice to help change this trajectory. That I am sure of. One powerful way we can do this is to support the campaigns of candidates at all levels of government who are committed to defending due process and the rule of law, and who prioritize public safety. And another thing we can do is urge our state representatives to draft legislation deterring crimes targeting cops. I'm attempting to get a bill drafted here in Wisconsin that would mandate prison time for intentionally attacking a police officer. It's similar to a bill signed into law by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in 2021.
That's good.
Yeah.
It's devastating that we would have to spend time creating such a law.
Well, there are laws.
Obvious.
There are laws punishing. There are laws. there are laws against attacking an officer. However, there are no mandatory laws. We're looking for mandatory laws because right now,
those can be used as leveraging agents in copping pleas for district attorneys.
Right. And it's at the discretion of a prosecutor right now. So if you live in a place like Seattle or Madison or New York and you're a police officer, the chances that you'll see justice are not as great as if you live in a state like Florida. So on a similar note, we can urge our federal representatives to prioritize legislation deterring acts against cops. One bill currently prioritized by the Fraternal Order of Police, and one that I'm closely watching and advocating for, is the Protect and Serve Act. And it would impose mandatory minimum sentences for crimes targeting police officers.
That's good.
And another thing is to consider writing an op-ed or a letter to the editor of both local and national publications. Suggested topics include an open letter to your federal reps, urging them to support the Protect and Serve Act, an open letter to your state reps, urging them to draft legislation deterring violence of police officers. Another letter could be how women are harmed by poorly staffed police departments, or a rebuttal to a piece that unfairly places police officers in a bad light. So we have to start pushing back. We have to be more vocal because there's too much silence right now. I mean, when cops are being attacked, they're being zealously prosecuted. There's very little pushback. Yeah. We really need to start speaking up and, giving some resistance to this war on cops that we're experiencing right now. Mm-hmm. And another thing is to consider supporting your local police department. And there are a few ways to do this. You can start by learning the issues impacting your local police by attending city council meetings and getting to know your officers, then work to elect pro-public safety alders and mayors. So don't be afraid to speak up when your police department or an officer is unfairly criticized. Another thing, and this was one of my favorite activities, was to host an open house style appreciation party where cops and community can interact in a positive environment. And I love throwing these parties, and I really miss throwing these parties.
And Christy, I was the beneficiary of those parties, and I'll tell you, that woman can cater any party you ever had.
Oh my goodness, I love that. That is so great.
Well, it's a great opportunity it's a very positive event for the community. And, we solicited donations, food donations from local vendors. So they were involved. We had the police horses. We had the police dogs come in. We had the chief come in and talk. And it was a way for the police and community to interact in a very low profile, kind of positive, casual environment. Well, and I think everybody left feeling really good and really positive. So
the main thing is that, you can have a designated police week, which is appropriate, and you can have the regular politicos go through their rhetoric. The chief is a cheerleader, always, I hope, and an advocate for the people that they serve. But it means more when it's a grassroots initiative like your group did, to bring that authenticity into the room. And that's why I think they were so well attended. And that's why I think the officers appreciated, because you're the only ones in that schematic that I described that didn't have an initiative or weren't trying to do what they were supposed to be doing and encouraging the police.
Wow. I love that. I'm already inspired. I know my chapter will be as soon as they hear this.
That is the point of doing this. And I'm so happy to hear this. That makes me very happy to hear that.
Yeah.
And just one more thing. And I just wanted to mention that our nation is in the midst of a public safety crisis that's devastating law enforcement and claiming innocent lives. We have the power to change the trajectory. And we really do need to speak up. We really do need to speak up. So with that, I will leave it to you.
Love it. Thank you so much. You put so much work into that. And it just gets me going again. I get to thinking, and I'm thinking, moms, we've got to do something. We can't do nothing. So I've got some questions for you, Chief Koval. Do you have any hope that the current landscape can be turned around, and what would it take? Can we expect any change?
Well, again, seeing things like this initiative here today gives me great pause for hope, because if left to its own devices, I'm not seeing a clear-cut sense of anything happening through the mainline media. So I do think it's going to have to be a grassroots sort of initiative where people decide we want to take back our communities. The quality of life has diminished. Our children are unsafe, and we don't want to run in the face of what we're facing now in a daily life. So it's going to require that sort of elementary sort of grassroots from the bottom on up to sort of allow these politicos and these chiefs to understand that our constituents might be not as vociferous or activistic or inclined to violence as the people that are getting all the pub.
Right.
But these are people who pay their taxes. They're trying to be good parents. They're trying to be good citizens to the community, and they haven't been heard, or they've been heard to the point that it's not representative any longer. So
Right.
I want to believe in the hope. I do want to believe that things can get better, but sometimes, as cliched as it may be, may even have to go a little further in hitting rock bottom before it shakes us into our sensibilities. And, when I look at, for example, not to pick on them, but in San Francisco, when you have major retailers shuttering their windows and doors and sending their employees home because it's not safe, or there's wholesale looting and retail theft. I don't know at what point, when do we say uncle to this,
Right.
and say we give up? We've got to right the shift. And unfortunately, it hasn't happened that far yet. But what are we seeing, Christy? We're seeing gradients of people who are fed up by what? They're fleeing the urban areas. In some instances, they're fleeing whole states. So I do think people are voting with their feet,
Right.
and they're trying to escape it. But I think they feel they're, as one entity, I can't affect that kind of transactional change. That's why groups like yours, when bonding together, offer eternal optimists like me some measure of hope for the future, if enough people feel the same way as you do.
And I think there are people who really want to help, because I have people email me quite a bit, or, I want to help. What can I do? They just don't know where to get started or how to get started. So that's why I'm laying out some ideas that I think that could really be beneficial.
I love that. Yeah. And that's what our network is. Oh, yeah. And that's what our network is about, because when the pandemic hit and things just went over the cliff, it was a spiral. It was a tipping point, right? We were hearing from women, we need community. We need to know who thinks like us, first of all, so that we don't feel insane. Are we insane? Maybe we're insane. I don't know. But if you get enough people around you, and then you suddenly realize there's probably more of us than there are of them, no, I don't encourage an us and them attitude, right? But because we're trying to build community, but you do have to find people that are like-minded in order to take any kind of action and get anything done. So I'm super excited, because I know we're going to have a lot of opportunity, whether it be this issue or another issue in regards to public safety. We're going to see a lot of things happen here soon. Okay, I'm going to ask you kind of a controversial question.
Oh boy.
So I serve as president of a charter school. It's a K-8 charter school. And the biggest debate that I get when we talk about having an armed officer on our campus, I am hoping we will. But the biggest opposing debate is, well, it doesn't actually deter shooters. And in my mind, I'm thinking, like, what is this, Minority Report? Like, how you can't measure things that don't happen, And I mean, to be fair, probably what they're saying is that if a shooter's going to shoot, they're going to find a school that's easier to breach. Okay. They won't just not shoot anything. And then in my mind, I'm like, well, then let them go to the school down the road. I know that sounds awful, but my responsibility is to my kids, right? Because at the end of the day, I have to be the one looking those parents in the eye saying, what did I do or did not do to protect their kids? So love to hear from you on what you think on that whole conversation.
Well, I believe, of course, that the presence of school resource officers, SROs, are instrumental in so many ways, tangible and intangible. Like a member of a complementary cadre of educators, I think that they should be incorporated almost as if you would the social worker or the nurse or anybody else, because it's a holistic approach. But to your specific point about safety, we only need to see just a month and a half ago in Nashville. There is no doubt but that active shooter solicited what she thought was a softer target.
Yep.
So when we hardened our targets, there is definitely discernment by those who are picking who they will next choose to victimize. So it goes to all the things from the type of glass we're using, to the locking doors, to the camera monitors, to in some of the big urban areas, literally metal detectors in some of these major urban schools. But moreover, the SRO is the sort of the X factor, the intangible. And we saw in Nashville that there were literally schools that were bypassed because they knew there was an SRO there. So I think you have to do what you have to do in today's difficult, challenging lives that we live to say, and I'm with you, at the end of the day, me, myself, and I and my family, we want to pick a school where I can feel comfortable. Not only is the curriculum consistent with what we're trying to parent, but also the school is taking affirmative and intentional steps to make this a hardened target.
Yeah, that's good.
I agree with you. And I'm also giving you permission not to feel guilty about that, because I think that's the primacy of being a good parent.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I if more school board members could hear that, in my mind, so we get persecuted for the decision. Well, so let it happen. Let us take the bad PR. These kids need to be safe. There's just, in my mind, there's just it's non-debatable, but.
Well, I appreciate your willingness to show that kind of resolve, because in this climate, and Paula knows, I have nothing to fear about cancel culture because I'm not on any social media and I'm retired. So come after me. But the reality is that people like yourself, in the prime of your earning capacity, working with others in a community, things can be said or done to you through the technology and the social media platform and so many other different directions. It can send your head spinning. I think that is courageous, nothing short of courageous, to have people be willing to sort of draw their proverbial line in the sand and say, listen, I can put up with a lot of the other noise that I choose not to engage in. But when it comes to my family and to my family remaining safe, this is where I have to draw that proverbial line in the sand. Yeah. And I applaud you, and I hope that you are joined by many others.
I appreciate that. And speaking of families, and because we are a women's network, what crimes do you feel women are now more at risk of?
Well, I think it was made reference to, there's a whole cacophony of crimes under the area of domestic abuse and domestic violence that Paula outlined in her PowerPoint. I think when you have a prioritization of calls for service, and some of those might be filtered out because, what we would have maybe said two officers to check on a loud noise complaint or voices arguing may not rise to pinnacle or the threshold of, well, that call can sit in the queue or can go unreported altogether because A, it doesn't meet our litmus test, or B, we have no one to send. So domestic violence is one of the things that concerns me greatly, because that's one of the reasons I entered this field, was to be an advocate for victims. And yes, I agree, men can be victims of domestic violence just as much as women. But the reality is, when you look at the numbers, it's overwhelmingly victims who are women in domestic violence situations. So let's just get down to where the rubber meets the road and talk realities here. And so I do worry about that as a byproduct of all this.
Yeah, it has to be, I know. And, you know, with the whole defund the police movement, and I'll make this my last question. You know, I understand that defund the police to mean that our police are buried in paperwork, they're buried in domestic disputes that are nonviolent. Here in Arizona, in my neighborhood, if the dog barking too loud next door, you have to call 911. You don't call the HOA, even though we pay an HOA. It's ridiculous. So I do understand some of the purpose behind that, but in my mind, it's not the solution to defund the police. In my mind, it means hire more administrative professionals and get less red tape. Anything the government puts their hand to has so many loopholes that you have to go through to get anything done. And so I guess my question for you is, have you seen that movement advance? And, you know, how do we stop it? Assuming you don't want the police to be defunded. Maybe you do. I don't know. But where do you think about that?
I think, first of all, it's problematic when you say defund the police. That means, okay, so we're going to take part of your resources that heretofore were being used in delivering services, and it's more appropriate to give it to someone else. I don't look at it as an either or. I look at it as an and propositional phrase. So, for example, when we have an incident of a mental health subject who is basically having a crisis, I don't disagree that in some ways, someone who's a mental health subject matter expert might, for the long term, be the better, more preferred methodology of helping these people resolve this episodic crisis. On the other hand, as is often the case, it's 2 a.m. and that person is holed up in a bathroom, locked, and they're cutting their wrists. I'm not going to send a clinician into that situation. I'm happy to see us create collaborative actions where the police come, make that scene stable, and then bring in the cavalcade of all those subject matter practitioners and professionals who can definitely deal with the issue in a long-term basis. But what I see operationally is that the defund the police has been used sort of as a false herring or as a metaphor for cut the police resources because we don't like the police. And that I don't appreciate. The other thing that I see, interestingly enough, with politicians, Paula, you know this because you've heard it in Madison, is that they know that now defund the police has sort of, the worm has turned and as crime has soared, people are not enthralled with that. So those who would still have disdain for the police and their operations are now using a new euphemism called let's reimagine.
Reimagine, right.
So I would just say for those who in various communities, a lot of these code words or phrases are shared. So be somewhat cynically or critically thinking about what those people are saying, or our politicians when they say reimagine, because in some instances it's a euphemism for defund.
I love what you just said, because we created the woke-tionary.
I love that. Oh my God, that's one of my favorite things.
That is exactly what it is for. It's what they say, but what they mean.
Right.
I think that'll be the new.
You guys, you're on the cutting edge.
Yeah, we like those. I lied. Okay, I do have one more question, because we are talking about women.
Yeah.
Women in law enforcement. So I guess it's a two-part question. How do we, as women, best support law enforcement? And what do we do about women hesitating to join the police force?
Well, in a larger sense, first of all, we need more women, because if you're going to do community policing, I mean, really do it, you want to see a workforce that's reflective of the community. And if we have less than 1 in 5 on our police forces as women, who are we casting then as those de facto role models or those mentors for women to aspire to this line of work? And so we need to have those real concrete examples of women doing this very difficult and rewarding job more and more as kids are seeing the people who do the work in their communities. And if we don't have that reflection of representation, that makes for a bad outcome altogether, because I can't tell you how many times I was at a domestic and, you separate, you isolate, you try to get an uncoached version of what each person's version is. And I have been with some women that gave me sort of one plan of events, but when I was lucky enough to be assisted by another woman colleague, a woman will open up to another woman, particularly where it might have been a sexual assault involved. And those are very graphic details that have to be related and imparted in a successful criminal prosecution. We need to have people that can be able to bridge those gaps. And that's why women, it's so important. And I think what we have to do specifically is when we have women aspiring to be doctors and lawyers and other very impactful positions, we have to put those first responders on that same sort of level, showing that it's not a job, it's a calling.
Yes.
It's a career, it's a vocation of impactfulness, and that there's nobility in service. And unfortunately, that runs counterintuitive to a lot of the messaging we see on social media and mainstream media. A lot of times we don't have as many stories about where the police are caught doing something good, as opposed to being the subject of something bad.
Yeah.
And most of what they do, I mean, there's no denying that there are bad police officers.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
But
absolutely.
The good they do, and they're not perfect. I mean, they're human beings that will make mistakes. Even the good ones will make mistakes. But the good that law enforcement does far outweighs the bad. I mean, there's not a doubt in my mind.
Well, Paula and I were having a sort of an esoteric academician discussion on our emails the other day. I don't know if you mind me sharing a little bit, but she was an article which showed the dichotomy of warrior and guardians in terms of role casting our police. And I said, you wear a lot of hats. On any given day, I'm a first responder to an accident, rendering aid. Yeah. I might be doing quality of life issues to your barking dog issue between the neighbors in Phoenix. I might be taking a report for a bad landlord who's not done anything to keep the apartments up to code. So you wear a lot of hats. And similarly, there is a time when we have to have a warrior mindset when in terms of getting people who are offending and creating victims in our society. But moreover, that's a subset of our overall mantle of being guardian. We're guardians to the community that's more encompassing, that's more inclusive, that's broader based. But a part of being a good guardian is to know when you have to turn on that warrior mode and make sure that people who would do bad things to good people know that there is a consequence for those actions.
It's a fine balance, and you always did it well.
Well,
you always did it well.
And if we don't get,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
If you don't get back to that, at the end of the day, women and children are always the most vulnerable. It just is.
It is.
So, well, I am so grateful for you.
So I still, as I began this, I want to say again to Paula for what you've done in terms of an advocacy and publishing, and in the midst of incredible odds, continue to be so resilient and resolved in getting these issues out. And for you guys at IWN, and Christy, God bless you for adopting us as orphans as a cause, because we need adoption. So thank you.
I love that. I'm on it. My wheels are spinning. I'm just going, there has to be something. So I appreciate you so much. I hope you guys, I know our chapter leaders got so much out of this. So God bless you guys.
Thank you. Same to you. God bless.
Thank you. This was excellent.
Bye-bye, you guys.
Bye, everybody.